Welcome to the Betrayed. The past year has been nothing short of a nightmare for me. Working alongside my father, I had been preparing to take the reins of our family construction business upon his retirement. However, fate had other plans. At the start of the year, my father suffered a sudden and fatal heart attack, shattering our future plans. As if that wasn't enough, shortly after his passing, another devastating blow came my way. My wife of 6 years decided to leave me. I still vividly remember the moment my mother called to deliver the heartbreaking news about my father. I was away on a business trip, and I rushed to the hospital, only to arrive too late. He had passed away before I could say goodbye. Following the funeral, I was thrust into the overwhelming responsibility of running the business alone. Transitioning from being partially involved to making all the critical decisions was a monumental task. The weight of this sudden responsibility began to take a toll on my personal life. I was constantly tied up at the office or traveling to meet clients and suppliers. Understandably, my wife, Angela, felt neglected. Despite my reassurances that this phase was temporary, she sought solace elsewhere, in the arms of Stephen Collins. When Angela dropped the bombshell that she was leaving me, it hit like a sudden, crushing blow. I sat there, stunned, staring at her, unable to process the depth of her betrayal. "Why?" I asked, my voice barely steady. "I know it's been tough, but why?" "You were never here," she replied, her tone calm but resolute. "I bumped into Stephen and we got talking. I'm sorry, Dave, but he was here when you weren't. I fell in love with him." Her words sliced through me. Angela stood, gathering her things. "I'm really sorry," she added before walking toward the door. "I'll come back when you packed and left." I watched the woman I had loved walk out of my life. Angela was beautiful, tall and slim with long, shiny brown hair. But as I sat there, her beauty felt like a distant memory. On the table in front of me were divorce papers. She wanted the house, custody of our daughter Millie, 30% of our savings, and child support. The magnitude of it all was overwhelming. I packed my clothes and personal belongings and left. I spent the weekend in a hotel before finding a more permanent solution. The following week, I rented a modest 3-bedroom house on a quiet street. At work, I chose to keep my personal life private. No one knew what had happened. They would find out eventually, but I wasn't in the mood to discuss it with anyone. Stephen Collins owned a chain of builders merchants and was our biggest supplier. To be honest, I didn't know who initiated the affair between him and Angela, nor did I care. I wasn't concerned about the business, as we had a rock-solid prenup that my father had insisted on. He'd made sure it was signed, knowing how important it was to protect the family business in case Angela and I ever divorced. At the time, we both believed we'd be together forever. But my only real concern was our daughter, Millie. I didn't want her to suffer because of the divorce. Angela got the house, child support, and spousal support, though the latter would cease if she remarried. 1 year after the divorce, Angela married Steve Collins. They moved into the house I had let her keep, and Angela got custody of Millie. I was supposed to see her 2 weekends a month, but gradually, those weekends became less predictable. They turned into whenever was convenient for them. Despite my efforts to call, there was always an excuse. Millie had an activity or they were going away that weekend. Eventually, I gave up trying to force it. I decided I would see Millie only when they decided it was okay, and I wouldn't press the issue anymore. I hadn't realized it at the time, but Angela had driven a wedge between me and my daughter. What really enraged me, though, was hearing how Collins would brag about his perfect family while belittling me at the same time. Angela's behavior and the loss of time with my daughter were already hard enough. But when I realized her husband was putting me down, I felt nothing but hatred for them both. One weekend, I was scheduled to have Millie, and I was looking forward to it. On Saturday morning, she asked me a question, but the way she referred to me left me in shock. She called me Uncle Dave. I corrected her. "I'm not your uncle, sweetheart. I'm your daddy." "But Stephen is my daddy," she replied. "Mommy said you were my uncle." That really hit me hard. I didn't confront Angela when she came to pick up Millie on Sunday. I didn't want to get into a screaming match in front of our daughter, but I promised myself I would address it the next time we were alone. That moment came after a particularly rough day at the office. I snapped, realizing I had been too soft for too long. It was time to take action. I formed a plan of revenge, one I would set into motion starting the very next day. That week, I spent a lot of time calling both current and new suppliers, guaranteeing them a significant increase in business if they could offer me favorable prices. Most of them agreed, eager to take on more work. I then called a meeting with the senior managers and the heads of the purchasing and accounts departments. When I entered the room, I could see the concerned looks on their faces. "Gentlemen, first and foremost, I want to make it clear that the company is not in trouble. This is not a meeting to discuss layoffs," I assured them. After that, their expressions relaxed. "I know we have many projects ongoing at the moment," I continued. "What I need to know is how many of them still require building materials." Don Foster, the head of purchasing, was the first to speak up. "I have requests from 2 site managers to place large orders this week." I slid a sheet of paper across the table to Don. "This is a revised list of our suppliers. From now on, I want all business to go through these companies." Don glanced at the sheet. "I don't see CCS Construction Supplies on here, Dave." "No, you don't," I replied. "And you never will. From this moment forward, Harrington Construction will no longer do any business with CCS. Not a single order will go to them. If anyone so much as buys a single nail or screw from them, they'll be fired immediately." I pointed to the names on the list. "Next to each supplier's name, you'll see what they can offer us. We can use them for anything we need. They've all guaranteed favorable prices and delivery schedules that work for us." The rest of the meeting focused on general business matters. 2 weeks after that meeting, the company won a significant contract to build a large number of houses, along with some nearby retail outlets. The amount of materials needed for this project would be substantial, and CCS wasn't going to get a single order out of it. Word spread quickly about the company securing the contract, and within days, the ripple effect of my actions was already starting to be felt. I had a visit from a salesman at CCS. He claimed they could offer us all the materials we needed at a very competitive price. I stopped him mid-pitch and firmly told him that we no longer dealt with CCS as a supplier. He looked visibly shocked as he left my office. A smile crept onto my face, which didn't go unnoticed by Sandra, my secretary. "I can see you enjoyed that," she said, grinning. I knew she was referring to my decision. "When you mentioned we weren't dealing with CCS anymore, things were looking up, weren't they?" Indeed, things were improving. Our new suppliers were keeping their promises, and smaller projects steadily came our way throughout the year. I was even asked to submit a bid to build a new headquarters for a growing tech company, and our bid was successful. The only low point that year was when my mother passed away. Her health had been deteriorating, and the stress of a divorce, along with not seeing Millie as often, didn't help. I know she missed my father deeply. Angela, on the other hand, didn't even bother to ask if she could attend the funeral. She never showed up. Several of our competitors and smaller subcontracting companies learned of my decision not to deal with CCS. When they asked me why, I simply gave them an honest answer. The owner stole my family from me, so I took my business from him. It might sound petty, but it was the one way I could get back at Collins without ending up in prison. Not long after, one of my managers, Bill, asked to see me. "What's on your mind, Bill?" I asked. "I just thought you might like to know that several of our smaller competitors and subcontractors have stopped dealing with CCS." He began. "As you know, I'm a Freemason. At our last lodge meeting, I learned that both Baxter and Charlesworth Construction are no longer buying from them. Seems like word's getting around." He paused before adding, "You might not know this, Dave, but a lot of people have a great deal of respect for you, partly because of your personality and the honest way you do business." "Thanks, Bill. It's nice to know people think I'm a decent guy. As for the way I do business, that's the image my father worked hard to create. I'll do my best to keep it up. Although business was going well, I hadn't seen Millie for a while. I resolved to give Angela a call from home later that day and ask if I could have her for the weekend. But before I had time to make the call, the doorbell rang. I opened the door to find Angela standing there. "Good evening, Angela. Please come in." I greeted her sarcastically. "Don't give me that smug look, Dave. What the hell are you playing at?" she snapped. "What are you talking about, Angela? We haven't spoken in ages. And now you burst in here accusing me of God knows what." "You know exactly what I'm talking about," she screamed. "You're trying to ruin Steven's business. It's bad enough that you won't deal with him anymore, but to badmouth him to all the other companies is downright nasty." I could tell Angela was seriously upset. She had sworn at me twice in less than 2 minutes. "I didn't tell anyone anything," I replied calmly. "Most people know what happened between you, me, and Steven. If they've taken their business elsewhere, it has nothing to do with me. Now, if you have nothing else to say, please leave. I haven't eaten yet, and I'm hungry." I slammed the door behind her and smiled to myself. It was satisfying knowing that Collins was feeling the pressure. After I ate, I called Angela and asked if I could have Millie for the weekend. She was still angry and hesitated, but after a moment, she agreed to drop her off on Saturday morning. Millie and I spent the day at the zoo, and on the way home, we stopped for hamburgers. I asked her how she was doing at school. "It's good, Daddy," she said, smiling. "My teacher says I'm doing really well. Mommy wanted me to go to another school, but I didn't go," she continued. "I'm glad, though, because all my friends are at the school with me." We watched a movie later at home, and by just after 9 p.m., Millie went off to bed. I sat there thinking about what she had said about going to a different school. The MY's short drive home that afternoon was a happy one. I knew CCS was struggling to stay afloat. Without an increase in business, it was only a matter of time before it would go under. Collins had already closed 2 depots, and the writing was on the wall. All that was left for Collins was his main yard and the head office building. When I told Angela that we had no new business, I struggled to keep a straight face. Right now, we had more work than ever. I felt a sense of satisfaction knowing she and Steve were struggling. My only concern, however, was Millie. She was the innocent one in the middle of all this mess. A few months later, Don Foster informed me that CCS had ceased trading and filed for bankruptcy. With the school holidays approaching, I seized the opportunity to spend time with Millie. Angela seemed relieved to have her off her hands for a few weeks. I took a holiday for the first time in years, and Millie and I spent 2 weeks in Florida. We visited Disney World and several other attractions. I was exhausted, but happy by the end of the fortnight. When we returned home, I had no idea what had been happening while I was away. There were no phone calls, so things must have been going smoothly. It was late when we arrived, and Millie went straight to bed. I unpacked our bags and soon followed her to bed. The next morning, we had breakfast before leaving to go to Angela's house. Angela wasn't in the best of moods, but she listened as Millie rambled on about the holiday and all the places we had visited. I casually asked where Steven was. "I have no idea, Dave," Angela replied. "He asked me to remortgage the house to save his business. When I refused, he stormed out and hasn't been back. That was 2 days ago, and I haven't heard from him since." I offered my apology and then left to return home. I had things I needed to take care of before returning to the office on Monday.
On Monday morning, Angela called me midway through the day, asking for some advice. It seemed that with Steven gone, some matters needed attention for the sale of the business. I advised her that if she wasn't listed as a director and the house wasn't tied to the business, she should do nothing. "It's Steven's problem, not yours," I said. I also offered to have Millie stay with me if it would help, but Angela declined, thanking me nonetheless. Sandra, my secretary, must have noticed the smile on my face. "You seem to be enjoying the demise of CCS," she remarked. "I couldn't care less what happens to him or Angela," I replied. My concern is for Millie. Angela eventually accepted my offer to help with Millie, and she spent a few weeks with me. I managed to get her to school on time and made sure I picked her up, one of the perks of being the boss. I also knew that the managers in the office would be fine without me for a few hours each day. I relished spending time with my daughter. Meanwhile, Angela struggled with Stephen's absence, redirecting his mail to his lawyer and contemplating employment to make ends meet without his financial support. Despite her situation, she never approached me for a job, though I wouldn't have hired her anyway. Stephen vanished, leaving his legal matters to his attorney. Meanwhile, a small company I dealt with bought the assets of CCS at a bargain, providing them with a new headquarters. Angela eventually divorced Stephen due to abandonment, downsized to a smaller home, and donated his belongings to charity. This change benefited Millie, who got a larger bedroom. Angela found work at a law firm, while my own business thrived, securing my financial future. The stress of Stephen's affairs and disappearance visibly aged Angela. Our communication improved, and I spent more time with Millie. Reconciliation with Angela was out of the question, and I made that clear. Though I wasn't dating anyone, she kept mentioning her niece. My goal of seeking justice against the man who tore my family apart was achieved. Now, I find peace in knowing I've done what needed to be done, unlike Stephen Collins, wherever he may be. To the attentive listener who's made it this far, your subscription would be greatly appreciated.